Hello, everyone. We're just getting started. And if you prefer French, there is an option for French language. You should have the option in your language settings at the bottom. We have interpretation from English to French. And we're being recorded. So I'll pass over to Stephanie for whenever she's ready.
Yeah, sure. Did you want to do some introductions of the webinar and how it connects to the other things while we're waiting for everyone to trickle in?
Sure. So yeah, if we have another minute. So welcome everyone. So this is part of the Young Canada Works webinar series on getting everyone ready to submit an application for funding for 2025-2026. So Stephanie, who is my colleague at the CMA, has kindly offered to host this session on supporting Indigenous initiatives in YCW applications. And my name is Louise, and I am with the CMA, the Canadian Museums Association. I'm a program officer for Young Canada Works at Building Careers and Heritage, as well as the communications liaison for YCW. So it's my role to just make sure everyone is aware of Young Canada Works, as well as being prepared to submit your applications. And we're here to answer any questions. And so hopefully at the end, you'll have some questions, and feel free to add them in the chat as well as we go, and we can have a look at the end. So hopefully it'll be conversational, and you'll come up with some questions while Stephanie and I are talking. And I'm just here mostly to provide the YCW specific focus of things. So it's mostly for Stephanie. Stephanie to share her wisdom.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Okay. Well, we have slightly less than registered, but I think that's quite a typical turnout, especially in this busy time. So maybe we should just get started and see if others join us. Yeah, I'll add my welcome to Louise's. Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Stephanie Daniluk, and I am the senior manager for community engagement with the CMA, and a large part of that work involves leading the Move to Action program with the guidance of the CMA Indigenous Council. So that's why I'm here to talk to you about some of that work and how it informs likely some of the YCW initiatives related to Indigenous programs and things. So yeah, let's get started. Do you mind going to the next slide? I always want to think about and acknowledge the territories of the Indigenous peoples that we are on, and I ask that you do the same. Well, I am acknowledging the land that the CMA Secretariat is on is located on unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe peoples. And the CMA acknowledges the colonial legacy of museums and heritage spaces, and is seeking to commit to both recognizing and promoting Indigenous people's self-determination over lands and cultural heritage through history and today. I myself am currently located on the traditional territory of the Nahiawak, Dakota, Lakota, Anishinaabe, and the homeland of the Métis and what's now Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. So that's where I am today, coming to you from my basement office. Okay, next slide. It's a bit of an overview of what you can expect today. I'll do a little bit of the Move to Action program overview just in case anyone is unfamiliar. It will be quite short. And if you have other questions, you can just look on our website for all the resources that are there. And then speak specifically to what considerations you might want to conduct as you are preparing your YCW applications in relation to Indigenous initiatives. And yeah, talk a little bit about some supporting resources that we have for you, and then hear your questions. We'll leave some time for questions, so please do ask any questions that you may have. Okay, Louise, over to you.
Great. So part of the reason that we are hosting this session today, while obviously the content is very important, Young Canada Works is also a federal government funding program for museums. And so it is an opportunity to ensure that government priorities are followed. So part of the employer guide for Young Canada Works lists sort of some of the government priorities. And I'll just quote from the employer guide. So it says, please note that the application assessment process will take into account the following priorities: Indigenous employers, eligible projects, projects aimed at Indigenous participants, Indigenous or non-Indigenous employers, projects focusing on Indigenous cultural heritage, and that can be with Indigenous or non-Indigenous employers, and hiring youth that are part of equity deserving groups. In the past, sometimes for when we're screening the Indigenous aspect of projects, we may not have looked at it as thoroughly as we should have. So the past 4 years or so, we have changed our procedures, and instead of just following the government priorities, if you happen to say Indigenous, use the word in your title. We're going to follow up and make sure that it goes deeper than the title and deeper than just putting the word Indigenous in your application. So we've created a procedure document for us, which has a lot of questions, and a lot of these issues will be raised by Stephanie. So we have some, I'll just give some samples. It's actually like a 3-page long document that we drew up to sort of make sure that we're looking, when we're reviewing applications, that we're looking into the projects that you're submitting to make sure that they are following the principles of UNDRIP and the principles that we outlined in the Move to Action report. So I sampled a couple here. So are the project objectives linked to those of an Indigenous community with whom current relationships exist and are demonstrated? Are the objectives linked to principles of UNDRIP and the Truth and Reconciliation Council's calls to action? Does your recruitment demonstrate existing relationships to communities? And if the outcomes are related to decolonization, is the intern solely responsible for these activities? So just in general, you just want to make sure that it's anything that you say that is going to happen, that it's linked to a broader, something broader in your organization that's already in place, that it's not just this internship or work term that you're just going to indigenize something and it has no support for it. It should be part of either like your mission statement or just your strategic plan or other procedures that you have been developing. So we focus on, is there an indication of an existing community relationship? We want to make sure that it's not the intern, especially if you are hiring an Indigenous intern, as that sometimes happens, where if you hire an Indigenous intern, you're just like, okay, well, you can handle all of this. So we want to make sure that they are well supported. So that comes up in a lot of the categories in the application, but especially in supervision and even in the description of tasks. If the intern is being relied on to provide content or ensure the accuracy of Indigenous content, is there support from broader engagement with a partner Indigenous community, or the support of an Indigenous advisory group? And will the organization be supporting these initiatives long term? So there's a lot of questions or a lot of things that we're looking at when we look at your applications. And I just wanted to highlight a couple of good examples that we have seen in past recent years. So there was one where it was a gallery space, and they are focusing on teaching an Indigenous language because of the decade of Indigenous languages. And so they this was something that has been in place for them. That's something that they had already decided they wanted to focus on. So it's not the sole role of the intern to just support this initiative in their organization. And they also partnered with a lot of local Indigenous makers, a lot of businesses. So they really outlined how they were going to be incorporating this into their broader organization. And in fact, it already is incorporated into their organization. And their programming all does follow the same sort of theme of promoting an Indigenous language and teaching the Indigenous language. So they had a lot of programming around that as well, and a lot of public events for it. So it was clear that it wasn't just sort of a very superficial like title. Anyways, that's sort of my main example. I'll pass back to Stephanie.
Hey, thank you. If you missed any of that, I cover it all in pretty big detail at the end too. I think I outlined all of those specific qualifications slide by slide, so you'll be able to see that. Okay, so I mean, what the reason that I'm here to talk to you is I was lucky enough to be involved in the last leg of the engagement and drafting and writing the Move to Action report, which looks to align museum practices with UNDRIP. So the CMA conducted some pretty widespread engagement with Indigenous communities about ways to best support Indigenous self-determination in museum and heritage spaces. And which is why all of that, if you haven't read it already, can be accessed in the Move to Action report itself. Next slide, please. Which outlines a set of new standards for museums in order to support UNDRIP and align with the TRC calls to action. So again, if you haven't had a chance to see that report and the compendium resources, those are all available on our website. So as we were doing the engagement for the report, we heard a lot of feedback from Indigenous communities, and particularly in these specific areas. We heard a lot of examples of tokenism still that was happening when it came to asking Indigenous communities or Indigenous professionals to do work within museums. And so what we heard was this, there's caution about jumping into action too quickly. And what that means is there's the need for some institutional learning and reflection that needs to happen before even jumping into any project. And I'll talk about that a little bit later in the presentation. And then also ensuring that any initiatives that you're engaging in are more than one-offs, but that they are indeed part of a longer-term strategy. So the report is divided into 4 sections: repatriation, governance operations, and engagement. And I'll be talking really specifically about some of the considerations related to YCW in these areas of governance, operations, engagement, and a little bit more about long-term planning as we go. A lot of reflection in the engagement sessions was on the idea of authority and the need to move beyond a consultation or engagement model and really embed authority in the projects themselves to the greatest extent that you can, or in the museum, even better. So thinking about UNDRIP Article Section 35, which says that Indigenous peoples have the right to determine the responsibilities of individuals to communities. What does that mean for museums engaging with communities? And how can you ensure that those communities are determining what those responsibilities look like and how they're fulfilled? So again, thinking beyond consultation. And, you know, if we look historically, we really see ways that Indigenous sovereignty was enacted since time immemorial and continues to be enacted today. And some of those here outlined for you. And the history section of the Move to Action report goes into greater detail, but, you know, the recognition that governance over heritage and all rights and have existed since time immemorial, and it was really colonial interference that erased or attempted to erase sovereignty over Indigenous cultural heritage in really specific ways, and thinking about ways that museums have played a part in that. And reflecting on that, I think, is a key first step. And then recognizing that Indigenous-led heritage efforts really have been required to meet certain colonial standards, including in museums, in order and thinking about ways that this has actually inhibited the assertion of authority. And so as you're thinking through your projects, making sure that you're not creating or centering, Western standards of professionalization over nation-based scholarship and approaches, that kind of thing. And acknowledging the sovereignty and self-determination in cultural heritage spaces that exists, and ways to make sure that that's centered. So some of that includes thinking about ways that leadership and advisory can be embedded in the museum itself, or ways that you can look for support outside, in Indigenous communities with whom you are partnering. And of course, this will look different museum to museum, because the nations with whom you are partnering will approach governance differently, both in their traditional ways and contemporarily. So really need to look to those communities to lead this work. And without it, these really can be really tokenistic efforts at programming and at projects. And yeah, I'll just leave that there because I think I go into it more on the next slide. So thinking about beyond advisory bodies, thinking beyond going to a community, looking for approval for a project, but thinking about ways to actually weave the governance through the museum and through the project itself. So yeah. And here's one example or a few examples that we've heard where the language of reconciliation or the proposed projects are used to get the grant funding, but not actually reinvested in the community needs. So really caution you about that in your own projects and your own applications. Next. So one of the questions you could ask yourself is, how are you ensuring that you are supporting governance for Indigenous projects within your institution? And what that can look like is thinking about the concept of nothing about us without us. And I'm just trying to think of a specific example. It can look like setting up a separate Indigenous authoritative body within the museum. Or, like I said, going to the community's elder circles, if they have those advisory bodies set up already, and working within the community with things that are already happening at that governance level. So there's a few different options there. But always making sure that these bodies have authoritative guidance. So that means not that they're not advising, but they have authority and get a yes or no say, rather than just providing some recommendations and enabling the museum to have the final approval. So making sure that those bodies do have final approval on projects and initiatives within the institution. Okay. On to operations, which we like to say two things. One is that UNDRIP is everybody's job, so supporting Indigenous self-determination in the institution falls to everybody, not just one individual who is hired to do that work. And so thinking beyond that single staff person that Louise had mentioned at the at slide 4, and ways that this is supported, in museum leadership, at finance levels, and with other staff members as well, and with volunteers if that's the case for your museum. Okay, I'm gonna turn to the next slide. So if you are hiring an Indigenous staff person as part of your project, or an intern as part of your application, thinking way about how you are moving beyond tasking that sole staff person to do decolonizing work or work to support Indigenous self-determination, and aren't just checking a box in that regard. As one example, I think we have seen applications where the intention was to hire an Indigenous intern to come and review an entire collection without any type of connection to community or any type of mentorship. And so, you know, there's kind of layers to the problematic nature of that, you know, and relying on one student's knowledge to decolonize an entire collection. It's a lot of onus on the student to speak for an entire nation. And it also, you know, really kind of sets them up for failure in a lot of ways. So thinking, you know, ways that you can look to the community to help mentor that that position, and I think we can see ways where having that governance model in place would really have helped there. Okay, so critically assessing, you know, what barriers may exist in your institution for Indigenous professionals. We heard incidences in the engagement where harm was encountered by Indigenous professionals or by Indigenous employees in institutions, either by board members or other employees or by visitors to the museum. And then when they asked for support to ensure their cultural safety, those mechanisms just didn't exist because they hadn't been put into place first. So really thinking about ways you can you will address anything that is issues that are encountered, and having that in place before you're hiring anybody is really key. We've recently seen some developments of policies in this area that are really interesting, in, you know, codes of conduct for visitors, museums. If you have an Indigenous interpreters, for example, in your museum, ensuring that those codes of conduct are read and encountered, I guess, by museum visitors right at the beginning, so that you can refer to those if you must, if folks are being harmful to boards and Indigenous interpreters. It's one example. Okay. Of course, labor and hiring practices factor into, oh, do you mind just going back? Labor and hiring practices factor in to operations as well. And so thinking when you are looking for an Indigenous intern or professional to come into your institution, what are you asking for? What kind of connections are you looking for? What kind of skills are you hoping to have in that person, and making sure that you're being really specific in your job descriptions, because that will help kind of make sure you're looking beyond just a tokenistic staff person that's kind of, you know, just like an Indigenous staff person, but that you really are seeking specific skills, that you're not piling too much on that person to speak for an entire, you know, Indigenous nation, and that you're also recognizing nation-based scholarship and community-based knowledge as well as any type of academic credentials, and making sure that you are valuing those in the same way. Okay. Next slide. I may have said some of this already, but really thinking, you know, about expanding job descriptions, then considering maybe alternatives to recruitment and interviewing if that's necessary. If you're asking folks to come in, say in the summer when they might be going for or needing to take ceremonial leave, or even in the winter if they're looking, if they need to take ceremonial leave, depending where they're coming from, that you are enabling that type of leave within the position, and compensating it as much as you can as part of the job, if indeed you are asking for them to come in, you know, based on their Indigenous identity and connections. Be transparent in levels of pay and in the job application, and compensate for any additional responsibilities. If community connection is a part of the job, that for the Indigenous employee that wouldn't be part of the job. For a non-Indigenous employee, then maybe you need to compensate for that in an additional way. And we've seen kind of additional percentages added on top of salaries in order to compensate for that. Okay, next slide. Engagement. I've spoke a little bit already about moving beyond tokenistic consultation, so we'll just skip past that one. To the next slide. And it speaks to the need to center community needs and ensuring that the community is leading the work and that it is also responsive to those community needs as much as possible. And that really means talking to the community first and not coming with a specific project in mind that you just want to review or that you want them to kind of just add in certain places. It's really a ground up and a building for the long term that we want to see in these types of applications. And there we do have a engagement toolkit on our website that has a checklist. I think it's on page 9 that walks you through kind of core considerations when you're entering into this type of work. So I would encourage you to look at that if you haven't already. Okay, so a few really specific things to think about is ways that you're supporting the project through a long-term strategy or plan, including resources and capacity, ensuring that governance and policy is supporting the project as well, and making sure that the community needs have been are informing the project. This pretty much says the same thing, but just in a little bit of a different way. So we'll just skip on ahead, I think. Okay, now we're getting into kind of the same checklist that we heard from Louise. So I won't read these, but maybe I will just highlight some specific examples. So we have seen examples in the YCW project and objectives section that link either to a strategic plan and reference, reconciliation, support for move to action standards or UNDRIP, and relate the project to those broader objectives. And so that's something that we're looking to see. And then really important is if you're looking to do community-based work, are you working with a community already, or who are you looking to build those relationships with? Making sure that there's thought to that really specific connecting factor. Okay, next slide. Again, if the intern is solely responsible for decolonization, how are they supported outside the museum? So understanding sometimes this, this capacity doesn't exist within the museum to support this type of work. Where are you looking outside for that? So that could be a particular elder maybe that is being paid to support the intern, or again, an advisory group or governance group that works with the institution. Okay, so again, an indication of an existing relationship to a community, and that there are budget lines that correspond with any requests for traditional knowledge or yeah, or kind of community engagement work. That's what I'm trying to say.
Can I just interject here?
Yeah.
For a YCW related thing. So just to note, if you are applying for a Young Canada Works at Building Careers and Heritage position, there's definitely room in the budget section of the application to say these and name what they are. And that's the sort of thing we definitely look at. A lot of people will just put in the money that they expect from YCW and their contribution and sort of ignore the rest. But we really do look at what you put thought into in terms of what else do I need to do for this internship. The other stream is the budget isn't as detailed. So, but there is certainly space for you to put this under description of tasks. or anywhere in the application. There's always space for you to say, to acknowledge. And I think that's really important, to acknowledge that that you should pay an honorarium. And I think that's something that gets overlooked frequently. So I just wanted to add that in there just as a logistical thing.
That's great. Thanks, Louise. Feel free to jump in any other time. Yeah, I think there's been a lot of instances of seeing like will consult with community or will liaise with community without any of those specifics. So yeah, that's wonderful. Okay, next slide. Okay. So again, this is sort of reiterating the same thing, but if you are relying on the intern to provide certain knowledge or accuracy of content, within collections or within an exhibit, we've seen that I think quite a few times where the person hired is responsible for developing a project, developing an exhibit, making sure that they're connected to broader engagement or broader advisory. And that there is plans beyond the specific initiative within the museum to continue those relationships that are built through the project. I mentioned this in the operations section, but for the skills that you're looking to be gained, if the skills are referencing Indigenous knowledge or language capacity or oral history skills, are the resources to gain these skills being provided throughout the duration of the application. So I think we've seen instances where it's been said that, the student will gain an understanding of oral history, how to conduct oral histories in community, and whether that person being hired is Indigenous or non-Indigenous, the point is, where and who is guiding that work. And if it is the community, again, making sure that you're compensating the community for that capacity building, and thinking about ways that that capacity can be left in the community as well, so that it's a reciprocal relationship and not just the person in the position who's gaining that capacity. So investing in the community capacity as much as possible. Again, if you're looking for an Indigenous candidate, which community would you like them to be connected to? And can you be as specific as possible? Or if there's other knowledge that you would like them to bring, what would that be? Would it be knowledge of oral histories in a certain region? Would it be particular language skills related to an Indigenous nation? This really, again, as specific as you can be, means you won't be over prescribing the skills that you're looking for from that candidate. And yeah. And then trying to be as flexible as possible in equivalencies for community knowledge and nation-based scholarship, and considering those on par with Western institutional knowledge, experience, and education.
Also, just to add in there under candidate profile, we do like to see that you are reaching out, even if your project is not Indigenous, that you are reaching out in some way to like Indigenous communities in your area, really that you're reaching out to everyone possible. So, but Indigenous especially. So if you have a connection with the community or a friendship center, that you're reaching out to reach as many Indigenous youth as possible.
Thank you. Next slide. In the orientation and training section, looking to see that this includes Indigenous cultural awareness training and bias awareness or anti-racism training, not necessarily for the candidate, but for others in the institution, if possible, and if that hasn't been conducted yet, or maybe referencing, if the board did cultural sensitivity training last year, I think maybe flagging that would be worthwhile. Louise, would you say?
Yeah. Completely agree.
Yeah.
Um,
Thanks. Yeah, so the idea isn't necessarily focusing on the training that would be provided to an Indigenous candidate, but training that might be provided to create spaces of cultural safety for those candidates as well. And then, of course, funding any training that's required. Next slide, please. Again, in the supervision section, and we've covered this already, I think, a few times, but making sure that the person that you're hiring, if necessary, is partnered with someone with similar lived experience to help mentor and support. For example, an emerging Indigenous professional. And okay, now to the logistics of the job poster itself. Does it have an equity statement? If you need some examples, we have an operations toolkit on our website that provides quite a few different examples, and encouraging you also to include the equity statement not only in postings for Indigenous specific candidates, but for all postings within your institution to ensure that, again, that UNDRIP is everybody's job, that supporting Indigenous self-determination and those competencies are flowed through the whole of your institution, not just in one job. Okay. In the post-project portion, if you're thinking about career orientation plans or networking activities, are you thinking about ways that those spaces support or align with Indigenous self-determination and UNDRIP, and making sure that there's some type of connecting point there, so that, you know, that is a culturally safe space, for example, but it's also a space that makes sense as a networking space for Indigenous professionals. Now, here's a plug. The CMA does have a Indigenous Museum Professionals Networking group. And Nicole Henry facilitates those discussions, and it's entirely Indigenous only space, and it's an online group that meets monthly. And so if you do have Indigenous professionals in your institution, please encourage them to come to this. It's meant to be kind of a space where folks can talk about things that they're encountering in a safe, closed setting. So there's a plug for one networking opportunity. Okay. Okay, well, here we are repeating ourselves again, but just remember to be as specific as possible about what kind of knowledge you are looking for, what kind of capacity you need those candidates to have, and there's a few listed here. So, you know, community connections, Indigenous museology, and language skills are not all the same. So same, you know, type. So of, yeah, same type of skill. So if you're looking for one or all, make sure you are listing and being as specific as possible. If you're recruiting, also, I think Louise mentioned this, but be as broad as possible in your scope, looking beyond your usual networks for posting and for hiring, and thinking about you know, Indigenous specific places where you can post these job opportunities. And Louise, do you want to comment on the YCW travel?
I would love to. I was just about to unmute myself. So we do have that for, you know, that is available to any student or intern who has to travel more than 125 kilometers, which can come in handy for anyone. But not everyone is aware of it. So just making sure that you're aware that the people that you hire can come from across the country, the far north of you. They can literally come from anywhere in Canada, so it doesn't have to be your immediate community. And also just another note too, thinking of recruitment, if it's not possible for someone to get to you, this was another thing that was good about, I think, the example I was using before was that they made it flexible so that someone could do remote work. So just making everything as barrier-free as possible is helpful. And we do have a remote work guide on the CMA website that can assist with sort of adjusting projects and things to help with that. But it's quite flexible. So there's lots of things to help you get people to you, or to help them fulfill their roles if they can't be where you are. But yeah, that's all I have.
That's great. Okay, I think we're winding down here. We have a few more slides, but not many. Okay, so here's some examples of places of job boards and spaces you can look to for broadening the posting of those positions, should you like. Facebook, obviously, probably already use that, but if not, a good example. Even Instagram, get some good places to look. Yeah, next slide. We're done. Yeah. Woo, lots of time for questions. So if anyone has any questions, I think we're happy to take them now. Oh, you're muted.
Thank you. Sorry, I was just saying you should be able to put in the post in the chat, or alternatively, oh, someone has their hand up. Perfect. Leslie Garlow.
We got to,
There
there
you
we
are.
Hi, good morning over here in BC. I'm coming from the unceded Sinakh territory, or what commonly known as Nelson, BC. I'm just curious about instances where issues like honorarium or academic or art fees are included in the budgeting, because those can be drastically different. And so I kind of find that yeah, that it kind of leans sometimes to go towards the less expensive of the things. And so I'm just wondering if you have an outline for that. That good question for here.
I'm so sorry. Are you what is the question on it?
I understand it.
Okay,
There,
thank you.
that is something that we don't have any specific guidance on that yet. It's something that we are looking for to do, but we do recommend aligning with CARFAC, or as one example, and yeah, as a way to kind of set those standards, I think, for the fee approach. Also encourage that if you're looking to hire one person for long term, that you think about, maybe moving beyond an honorarium and think about ways to have more of a contract or based work. But if you do want some more information on our approach, Leslie, if that's at all helpful for you, just send me an email and you and I can I can outline that for you if you need it to show to somebody as a standard. I'm happy to help.
Thank you so much. Yeah, because I'm always inclined to pay more as much as possible. But yeah, thank you. That would be helpful.
Yeah, you're welcome. Okay.
I see Val has posted a question. Is this a separate funding opportunity from the museum assistant grant? Do you mean MAP? Is it separate from MAP? Is that what you mean? Are you able to speak? Sorry, I'm just trying to scroll up.
I've unmuted. Can you hear me?
Perfect. Yes, I can.
Okay. I don't. Oh, now I've got my earphones. I don't know what MAP is, but we did get a Young Canada Works grant for a museum assistant last year, and will apply again this year. But I'm wondering if this particular focus of supporting Indigenous initiatives is a different branch.
No, not at all.
So if we apply again for a museum assistant, okay, so this supporting Indigenous initiatives is the same application. Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's the same. So it's just this is sort of extra assistance in how to submit a a Young Canada Works application.
If you want to focus on
Well,
supporting Indigenous initiatives specifically.
yes, yes, yeah, so it's encouraging you strongly to do so.
Okay, got it.
Yes.
Thanks.
And I posted, you said you weren't familiar with UNDRIP, so I posted, there was a link to
Yeah, I see.
well,
Thank
okay,
you.
perfect. Yes.
Yeah, thanks.
No problem. Perfect.
I would also point you in the direction of some of the CMA's resources on UNDRIP in heritage spaces, which I will put one in the chat now. Just 1 second. Any other questions that you see? Please.
I don't see any hands up. But if anyone has any, does anyone have an application that you're thinking of that you have questions about specifically? I'll put my email address in case you have questions, and also the YCW and OIC something was posted. Did I miss a question? Oh. For some reason it doesn't let me scroll. Oh no. And I'll just put in the general YCW email address in case anyone has questions on their application. So the deadline is January 17th of 2025. So just over a month from now. If there's any questions between now and then, please feel free to email me or Stephanie. Are there any other events that are coming up, Stephanie, that are related?
No, maybe I'll just point out a few things I'm popping in the chat here. So, well, there is one event actually, but I put the link to our resources, which have toolkits in all of these areas, including repatriation, engagement, operations, and governance. So please check those out. Lots of new repatriation resources in particular. I have put the link to the Indigenous Museum Professionals networking group that you can sign up for Indigenous heritage workers. And I will add that the CMA has been conducting Move to Action, a web course that's based on a report and the standards, and walks folks through the report, but then also a series of assignments that assists in developing policy and supporting resources in your institution. And we will be doing another version of that in the spring. So if this is of interest to you that you'd like to learn more about, look for that too. Those are all my plugs.
I got to sit in on a couple of sessions of the MTA course, and it was fantastic. They were great speakers, and I learned a lot. It was great. So I highly recommend it. Oh, and I was going to add, so I'll be sending out an email, and I'll include all of the resources that Stephanie shared with you. And I think that's probably it, unless anyone has any last questions, which I very much welcome. If you do have a question, please feel free. And thanks, Fabiola, for joining us. Okay, I don't see more questions, so I guess that we will conclude here, and do let us know if you have questions, and you should get an email from me probably on Monday with everything. So, and a recording of the session. So thank you so much, everybody. And thank you to Genevieve for interpreting. So have a good rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.